We now are going to have 4 short videos, each of them about a specific research project in the area of what we might call social psychology. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this. They are all terrible. They are dreadful science, one worse than the other. Nonetheless, we have learned from each of them. And one might ask, why does such terrible science seem to happen specifically in the field of social psychology? And part of the answer is that psychologists have a strange role to play. They're required to counsel people, to take care of them, to give them lifestyle advice, and all that is completely at odds with some of the requirements of scientific work. It's more like the role of a priest than that of a scientist. And in social psychology, we get this weird collision because we're very often, so psychologists are trying to respond to questions that people have because they're scared and they're worried. At a time like this, in the time of the virus, we can really, really appreciate there will be lots of social psychology studies coming out about the time of the virus because we turn to these people who we respect. The trouble is, psychology is not necessarily the best place to answer such questions, as we'll see. But we'll take them one at a time. And in each case, what we're going to ask is not only what is the nature of the study being conducted, but why did this study happen? Why were these questions asked at this moment in time and history and place? Because social psychology is always a response to collective worries and anxieties. The first case we're going to deal with is the oldest, and it comes from the work of Harry Harlow, who I'm just going to call a creepy scientist. Harry Harlow's main work was done in the 1950s, though he lived to 1981, and he worked with, not with humans, but with rhesus macaque monkeys. Let's discuss his work first, and then we'll ask, why did this happen? He is best known for his scientific work that demonstrated that infant monkeys need love and attention. Who would have thunk it, right? That shouldn't be a surprising thing. Furthermore, this was then used in order to argue that human infants need love and attention. Again, a sort of a duh finding. In some of his best known work, he would take the baby monkeys, very young baby monkeys, take them away from their mother and rear them in isolation. In one famous case, he would have 2 surrogate mothers. One was just a bare wire frame with a milk bottle on it. The other was a wire frame with a soft teddy cloth on it. And what you would find is that the baby monkeys would cling desperately to the soft terry cloth because they wanted to feel the touch of a mother. And then they'd run away, scamper over and get the milk when they needed it and come back to the terry cloth. And this was taken as scientific work that demonstrated that monkeys need social touch and affection. As I said, duh. There were terms of art in Harry Harlow's lab that are shocking. Terms like the pit of despair, and the rape rack. The rape rack was used for forced insemination. The pit of despair is shown here. This was a bin in which monkeys were kept in a severe social isolation, out of which it was demonstrated that they need social contact. This is very, very strange work. Here's a little pop-up robot that was used to scare small monkeys in Harry Harlow's lab. Doesn't look scary to you, but I assure you, to the infant monkeys, where this pops up, it was a traumatic experience. There's at least 2 developments from Harlow's lab that are worth mentioning. One is that he contributed to the creation of the animal liberation movement in the USA because people observed that what he was doing was animal torture. And it gave rise to a certain degree of sensitivity to the ethical issues in research using animals. So I guess that's not all bad. Another thing that came out of it is the slightly antique now, but otherwise important notion of attachment theory, which is associated with the names of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. This was a very important social psychological field that inquired into the consequences of a rupture to the early infant-mother relationship. And this became very important in framing research into the kind of damage done to young children in institutions, in orphanages, and so on. So that was very important. As I said, it's a bit antique now, but it gave rise to some straightforward field work in psychological theory that is important. The work itself is very odd, though. So the question is, why did scientists feel the need to frame their work in this fashion? Well, we have to understand where this work arose. It arose in the United States of America shortly after the Second World War. There had been vast demographic movements and change. The Great Depression had happened. People had moved from the Dust Bowl, from the arid plains, into the cities in vast number. And in the cities, we had the development of the suburbs, and we had a massive change in industrial production brought about by Second World War. All of this led to the development of what we now think is the quintessential American suburb, and the quintessential American nuclear family with 2.2 children and a station wagon, and living the suburban dream. Very much part of the story of capitalism. This was the modern consumerist future. And this had happened very suddenly, relatively speaking. And what had really happened, well, one way of looking at what had happened is that the extended family had been destroyed. People had formerly lived with a different kind of social connection. They had not lived in these suburban units. And so the way in which parenting skills have been transmitted in American society had been ruptured. And so people were clueless. They really did not know how, they felt they didn't know how to raise their children. A question that wouldn't have arisen before because you just got this from your mother or your father and your extended family, or lots of nans and aunts and uncles and so on. So there was a great appetite for instruction in matters that had previously simply been passed on in practice. So there's a great lesson to be learned here. This work was animal torture, and it was proving things that shouldn't need to be proved, but it was responding sensitively to specific fears in society, and it did give rise to the framing of questions that were important questions. So we'll see this again.